Rain pounded against the windows of our Portland home, each drop like a tiny hammer striking the glass. The weather matched my mood perfectly, dark, relentless, suffocating. Mira stood before me, her posture rigid and unyielding, a manila envelope extended in her manicured hand. Her blue eyes, once warm with affection, now regarded me with clinical detachment. "Divorce papers," she said flatly. "I've made it easy for you. Everything's outlined clearly." I took the envelope without a word, my fingers barely registering its weight. 8 years of marriage reduced to legal jargon and property divisions. That's it. Myra's voice rose slightly, her perfect eyebrow arching upward. No argument? No questions? I opened the envelope and skimmed the first page. My name, Elias Carver, typed neatly beside hers, soon to be separated by law as we had been by heart for months. "What did you expect?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. She let out a short, bitter laugh. "I don't know. Something. Anything. You never fight, Elias. Not for your career, not for us." Her gaze hardened. "You're not man enough to fight for me. You never were." The words sliced through me, precise as a surgeon's scalpel. I'd heard variations of this before, whispered during arguments, implied in her sighs of disappointment. But never so raw, so final. I could have told her about the promotion I'd declined because she'd wanted to stay in Portland near her friends. I could have mentioned the countless nights I'd waited up, accepting her flimsy excuses for coming home late smelling of unfamiliar cologne. I could have fought then. Perhaps I should have. Instead, I reached for the pen on our kitchen island, the one I'd given her for our 3rd anniversary, now used to dismantle what we'd built. I signed each page with deliberate strokes, the scratch of ink on paper the only sound besides the storm outside. "There," I said, sliding the papers back to her. "You're free." Something flickered across her face, surprise, perhaps disappointment. Had she wanted a scene? Tears? Begging? If so, she'd married the wrong man. "That's really all you have to say?" she pressed, gathering the papers with quick, agitated movements. I watched her, this woman I'd once promised forever to. Her dark hair fell in perfect waves around her shoulders. Her cream blouse probably cost more than most people's entire outfits. Mira had always been polished, ambitious, magnetic. I'd been drawn to her confidence, her drive, qualities I admired but didn't mirror with my quieter nature. "What would you have me say, Mira?" Her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced down and I caught a glimpse of the screen. A message from V with a simple question, "Done yet?" Something cold settled in my chest. Not surprise. I'd suspected for months, but the confirmation still felt like swallowing ice. "I have nothing else to say," I told her, turning away. She grabbed her keys and designer handbag, movements sharp with irritation. "The movers are coming for my things tomorrow. I won't be here." I nodded, moving to the window as she headed for the door. "Goodbye, Mira." The front door closed with decisive finality. I watched through rain-streaked glass as she hurried to her car, phone already pressed to her ear. She was smiling now, animated in a way she hadn't been with me in years. I reached into my pocket, fingers closing around the solid weight of my father's pocket watch. It was an old piece, silver and worn smooth in places, the only thing I had of his. He'd given it to me before he died, telling me that timing was everything in life. "Wait and watch," he'd said. "People reveal themselves if you just observe long enough." The second hand ticked steadily against my palm, a counterpoint to the chaotic drumming of the rain. I wound it carefully, a ritual that had always centered me. Mira thought I wouldn't fight because I wasn't man enough. She'd mistaken my silence for weakness, my patience for passivity. She, and whoever V was, had no idea what I was capable of when pushed too far. I moved to my desk and opened my laptop. The blue light illuminated my face as I began a search. Not for lawyers or dating sites or any of the usual post-divorce cliches. I was looking for answers. In the drawer beside me, partially hidden under financial reports, lay a photograph I'd found last week while looking for a missing cufflink. Mira, laughing against a sunset backdrop, her head tilted toward a man whose face I couldn't quite make out. A man whose arm was wrapped possessively around her waist. I picked up the photo, studying it in the dim light. The game had begun. And despite what Mira believed, I was very much ready to play. The morning after Mira left, I called in sick to work for the first time in 5 years. My colleagues at Westbrook Financial would manage without their senior analyst for a day. I had more pressing matters to attend to, specifically the ghost of a man named V. I sat at my dining table, surrounded by the artifacts of our marriage. Photos still hung on walls, evidence of happier times now feeling like elaborate props in a play where I'd misunderstood my role. I spread out my materials, a legal pad, laptop, and Myra's old phone bill I'd found in the filing cabinet. 2 months ago, I'd noticed a pattern in her behavior. The late nights had begun last October, working dinners that left her energized rather than exhausted. The sudden interest in changing her appearance, new clothes, a different hairstyle, expensive perfume I hadn't bought her. The protective way she guarded her phone, always screened down, always locked. Classic signs I'd ignored, not out of naivety, but from a misguided sense of respect for her privacy. I traced the most frequently dialed number on her bill. 27 calls in 1 month, some lasting hours, often late at night when she claimed to be working. A quick search linked the number to Victor Hale, rising star in Portland's real estate development scene. The V from her text message. I typed his name into my laptop. Images filled the screen. A tall man with carefully styled dark hair and the practiced smile of someone accustomed to getting his way. In most photos he wore tailored suits that probably cost more than my monthly salary. The society pages loved him. Portland's most eligible bachelor transforms waterfront. Hale Properties secures historic downtown deal. A memory surfaced. Mira coming home excited last fall, talking about a new client at her law firm who was revolutionizing the city. How her eyes had lit up describing his vision. How she'd volunteered to be the lead counsel on his accounts. I rubbed my temples, feeling a dull pressure building behind my eyes. Outside, Portland's infamous fog had rolled in, shrouding the neighborhood in ghostly white. It seemed fitting, the world beyond my windows as unclear as my past had become. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother, Judith. Mira called. We should talk. Of course she had. Mira had always cultivated a relationship with my mother, positioning herself as the daughter Judith never had. I ignored the message. There would be time for that conversation later. Instead, I retrieved my father's pocket watch from my bedside table. I'd been 11 when he died, old enough to remember his quiet strength, too young to fully appreciate his lessons about patience and observation. The truth doesn't hide forever, Elias, he told me once. It just waits for the right moment to reveal itself. I wound the watch methodically, the familiar action calming my thoughts. 365 degrees exactly, same as the days in a year. My father had been a man of precision. By noon I'd compiled a dossier on Victor Hale. 40 years old. Never married. Graduated from Wharton. Returned to his hometown of Portland 7 years ago after making a name for himself in Seattle and San Francisco. Specialized in luxury developments, often controversial for displacing lower-income residents. Known for his charitable donations and appearances at high-profile social events. A knock at the door interrupted my research. The movers Mira had mentioned, 3 men with bored expressions who barely acknowledged me as they efficiently packed her carefully marked boxes. I watched them dismantle half my life, removing her presence from the house with mechanical precision, much like how she'd extracted herself from our marriage. After they left, the house felt hollow, echoing with each step I took. I poured myself 2 fingers of whiskey, not to drown sorrows but to clear my thoughts. The amber liquid caught the late afternoon light as I contemplated my next move. Victor Hale was hosting a fundraiser that evening at the Pearl, an upscale restaurant downtown. The kind of event Mira had often attended alone, claiming I would be uncomfortable among her colleagues and clients. She'd been right about that, at least. I preferred spreadsheets to small talk, analysis to networking. But tonight would be different. I selected my best suit, charcoal gray, understated but well-tailored, and a deep blue tie Mira had once said brought out my eyes. Not that I cared about her opinion anymore, but tonight was about blending in, becoming part of the background. Invisible but present. The fog still clung to the city as I drove downtown, transforming the Willamette River into a ribbon of mist beneath Steel Bridge. Portland wore its melancholy like a familiar coat in March, the wet chill seeping into bones, the gray skies pressing down. I parked 3 blocks from the Pearl and walked, collar turned up against the damp evening air. I took position at a small bar across the street, angled toward the restaurant's entrance. Through the wide windows I could see Portland's elite mingling, champagne flutes in hand. Victor stood near the center, commanding attention with grand gestures. And then I saw her, Mira, radiant in a black dress I'd never seen before, laughing up at him with unrestrained joy. Their fingers touched as he handed her a glass, lingering a moment too long. In that instant, as they stood together unaware of my gaze through the foggy glass, I saw what I'd been missing all along. The perfect, devastating truth. I remained at the bar for another hour, nursing a single scotch while watching Mira and Victor through the restaurant's wide windows. Their body language told a story more honest than any words Mira had spoken to me in months. The casual touches, the conspiratorial leans, the way her eyes followed him when he moved through the crowd. They weren't being particularly discreet, I realized. They simply hadn't expected me to be watching. When they left together, I gave them a 3-minute head start before following. The night had turned colder, with a biting wind that cut through my suit jacket. Victor's sleek black Audi pulled away from the curb, Mira in the passenger seat, her profile illuminated briefly by passing streetlights. I returned to my car and kept a careful distance behind them, headlights dimmed. They drove to Victor's penthouse in the recently revitalized North Pearl district, one of his own developments according to my research. The building was all glass and steel, aggressively modern against Portland's more traditional architecture. I watched them enter the lobby, his hand possessively at the small of her back. "So this is where you've been disappearing to," I murmured to myself, making note of the address in my phone before driving home to my empty house. The next morning I went to work as usual. Spreadsheets and risk assessments provided familiar comfort, problems with clear solutions. My colleagues offered awkward condolences about my situation, news having traveled fast. I accepted their sympathy with polite nods, keeping the truth contained behind a practiced smile. During lunch I called my mother. She answered on the first ring as if she'd been waiting. "Elias," she said, her voice carrying that familiar note of disapproval. "I was beginning to think you were avoiding me." "I've been busy, Mother." "Too busy to discuss your marriage falling apart?" The directness was typical Judith Carver. No softening the blow, no easing into difficult topics. "I assume Mira has already given you her version of events." I kept my tone neutral, gazing out my office window at Portland's skyline, partially obscured by low-hanging clouds. "She's devastated, Elias. Says you just gave up. Signed the papers without even trying to save things." The accusation hung between us. "I always worried about that tendency in you, your father's passivity. The way you both just let life happen to you." My grip tightened on the phone. The comparison to my father was an old wound she knew exactly how to reopen. Did she mention Victor Hale? Pause. Too long. Who? Her lover, Mother. The real estate developer she's been sleeping with for months. My voice remained calm, factual. Another pause. "Relationships are complicated, Elias. If you were more present, more engaged." "Did you know?" I cut her off. "About the affair. Did Mira tell you?" The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken truths. Finally, "She was lonely." 3 words that confirmed everything. My own mother justifying my wife's betrayal. The betrayal she'd known about, perhaps even encouraged. I wasn't surprised. Judith had always preferred Myra's vibrancy to my restraint, had always subtly suggested I wasn't quite enough for a woman like her. "I see." I kept my voice steady despite the anger building inside me. "Goodbye, Mother." I hung up before she could respond and returned to my desk, methodically sorting through financial reports for the rest of the afternoon. When the office emptied around 5, I remained, using the company's resources to dig deeper into Victor Hale's business dealings. What I found was interesting. Behind the glossy press releases and charity galas lay a pattern of questionable transactions. Shell companies, properties flipped too quickly for suspicious profits, zoning changes that mysteriously aligned with his investments. Nothing definitively illegal, but enough smoke to suggest fire. Around 7 I finally left the office. On impulse, I drove to Myra's law firm, Morris & Blackwell. The building was mostly dark, but a few lights remained on in the upper floors where the senior partners and top associates worked, including Mira. I found her reserved parking spot empty. On a hunch, I drove to Victor's building again. Her car was there, parked next to his Audi. Back at home, I hung my coat in the closet, my fingers brushing against something in the pocket, a business card. I pulled it out, studying the embossed lettering, Victor Hale, CO, Hale Properties. Below that, a handwritten cell number different from the one on his website. I turned the card over, finding Myra's delicate handwriting, 7 p.m. Thursday. I checked my watch. Today was Wednesday. Tomorrow night they had plans. Portland's iconic neon signs began to glow through my windows as darkness fell, their colors reflecting off the wet streets below. Red, blue, green, washed-out beacons in the misty night. I set Victor's card on my desk and opened my laptop. It was time to become a shadow myself, unseen but ever-present in their lives. I would learn their patterns, their secrets, their vulnerabilities. Not for reconciliation, That ship had sailed the moment I'd seen them together, but for something else. Something I wasn't quite ready to name. My phone buzzed with a text from Judith. "We need to talk. There's more you should know." I left it unanswered, watching the city lights ripple through the rain-streaked glass. The web was expanding, connections forming between people I'd trusted. And at the center, a truth I was only beginning to glimpse. I met my mother at Riverside Cafe the next morning, a neutral territory with enough ambient noise to ensure privacy. She was already there when I arrived, stirring her tea with precise movements, her silver hair pulled back in its usual immaculate bun. At 62, Judith Carver still commanded attention, spine straight, expression formidable. "You look terrible," she said by way of greeting. "Thank you, Mother." I slid into the chair across from her, declining the waitress's offer of coffee. I needed clarity for this conversation. "I assume you're here because of my text." Her eyes, so similar to mine in color but not in warmth, assessed me carefully. "What more should I know?" I kept my voice low, controlled. She sighed, setting down her spoon with a small clink against the saucer. "Victor Hale isn't just Myra's paramour. He's a client of her firm. A significant one. I'm aware. What you may not know is that he's been working on a major development project. The old Riverside District. I knew the area, warehouses and industrial buildings from Portland's shipping heyday, mostly abandoned now. Prime real estate for someone with vision and capital. Morris and Blackwell is handling the legal work," she continued. "Mira specifically. It's the case that could make her partner. And you know this how?" I studied her face, noting the slight tightening around her mouth, a tell she'd had since I was a child, a signal she was approaching a truth she found uncomfortable. "I invested in the project." The admission hung between us. Outside, rain began to fall again, drumming against the cafe's windows. "You invested with Victor Hale. My wife's lover." Each word was measured, calm. "It was a sound business decision, Elias. The emotional complications came later." She reached for her tea again. "Not everything is about you. But it was about me, about my mother choosing financial opportunity over family loyalty. About her aligning herself with the man who'd helped destroy my marriage." "How much?" I asked. 200,000. A substantial portion of her retirement savings, the money my father had worked his entire life to build. "It's a guaranteed return of 20%, she added defensively. "Victor has investors lining up. And what does Mira get out of this arrangement besides the obvious? Partnership track. And a percentage of the development profits through a separate consulting agreement." She met my gaze directly now. "She's very talented, Elias. The firm recognizes that. As does Victor, apparently." The bitterness slipped through despite my efforts. "Your marriage was failing long before Victor," she said, her voice softening slightly in what passed for compassion from Judith Carver. "Mira needed someone who matched her ambition, her energy. You were always content to stay in place, just like your father." The comparison stung as intended. My father, the steady accountant who'd never sought advancement, who'd been content with his modest success while my mother had pushed for more, always more. My father was a good man. He was. But he was also complacent. She reached across the table, stopping just short of touching my hand. "You deserve to know about my investment. That's all." She stood, gathering her designer handbag, a gift from Mira last Christmas, I recalled. "Don't do anything foolish, Elias. The development is worth millions. Victor has powerful friends." After she left, I remained at the table, watching raindrops race down the window pane, merging and separating in unpredictable patterns. A plan was forming in my mind, not the emotional outburst my mother feared, but something calculated, methodical. Back at my office, I used my financial analyst credentials to access records that would be difficult for others to obtain. Property assessments, zoning applications, investment structures. I created a secure folder on my personal laptop, building a profile of Victor Hale's business empire, where it was strong, where it was vulnerable. The Riverside development was his crown jewel, a $500 million project that would transform 10 city blocks into luxury condominiums, boutique hotels, and upscale retail. Construction was scheduled to begin in 2 months, once the final permits were approved. As senior analyst at Westbrook Financial, I had access to powerful data modeling tools. I ran simulations identifying pressure points in Victor's financing structure. He'd over-leveraged himself, betting big on Riverside's success to cover debts from previous projects. It was elegant but precarious, like a tower of crystal glasses, impressive until a single piece was removed from the foundation. While my models ran, I hacked into Myra's email using a password she didn't know I knew, our wedding date plus her childhood dog's name. Sentimental for a woman who claimed I was the emotional one. Her inbox revealed hundreds of exchanges with Victor, some professional, many explicitly not. I scanned them quickly, ignoring the intimate details that threatened to distract me from my purpose. Then I found it, emails discussing the consulting agreement my mother had mentioned. Mira wasn't just Victor's lawyer, she was a silent partner with a 5% stake in the Riverside project. A stake that would be worth millions if the development succeeded. But more interesting was an email thread between Victor and someone using a private email server. The messages referenced Judith's contribution and keeping family matters quiet. An attachment contained a document titled investor_list_confidential.pdf. I downloaded it, heart racing as I scanned the contents. There, among the names of Portland's business elite, was an entry that made my blood run cold. J. Carver, $200,000 secured by MC Mira Carver. She had guaranteed my mother's investment. I closed my laptop, leaning back in my chair. Outside my office window, the Portland skyline was cloaked in early evening darkness, pinpricks of light emerging like stars in a concrete galaxy. My father's pocket watch ticked softly in my pocket, a steady reminder of patience, of timing. The first piece of the puzzle was in place. Thursday morning dawned with rare sunshine breaking through Portland's perpetual cloud cover. I took it as a sign, clarity emerging after days of fog and shadow. I had slept little, my mind racing with possibilities, cataloging options and their consequences like the risk assessments I created daily at work. By 6 a.m. I had made my decision. Not revenge. Revenge was emotional, messy, ultimately hollow. What I wanted was justice. Exposure. Truth brought to light. I created a new email account using a VPN to mask my location. The username was simple, concerned_citizen_pdx. From this anonymous address, I composed a carefully worded message to Catherine Reeves, an investigative reporter for the Portland Tribune known for her exposés on corporate corruption. I had followed her work for years, admiring her methodical approach and unwavering commitment to facts. Ms. Reeves, I wrote, I have information regarding potentially fraudulent practices in the Riverside Development Project by Hale Properties. I outlined the questionable financing structure I'd identified, the unusual zoning approvals that had been expedited without the typical review process, and included copies of public records showing discrepancies between reported construction costs and actual expenditures. I didn't mention Victor's affair with Mira or my mother's investment. Those were personal matters that would only distract from the legitimate business concerns. I wanted Victor exposed for his professional misconduct, not his personal failings. After triple-checking the email for anything that might identify me, I pressed send. The first domino was tipped. At work, I maintained my usual routine, analyzing market trends, attending meetings, providing recommendations to clients in my customary measured tone. No one would have guessed that beneath my calm exterior, I was monitoring my anonymous email account for any response from Reeves. By noon she had replied, interesting allegations. Need more specifics to pursue. Do you have internal documents? Of course she needed more. A good reporter wouldn't run with vague accusations from an anonymous source. I would need to provide something concrete, something undeniable. I left work early, claiming a doctor's appointment, and drove to my mother's house in the West Hills. I knew her schedule. Thursday afternoons she volunteered at the Portland Art Museum, giving tours to school groups. The house would be empty. The spare key was still hidden in the ceramic frog by the back door. My mother was nothing if not predictable in her habits. Inside, the house smelled of lemon polish and the lavender sachets she kept in every drawer. I went directly to her home office, a meticulously organized space with views of Mount Hood on clear days. Her password hadn't changed either. My father's birthday followed by her maiden name. I accessed her financial records, finding the investment agreement with Hale Properties. As I suspected, the terms were unusually favorable, promising returns well above market rate. The document was signed by Victor Hale and countersigned by Mira as legal counsel, with a note referencing special consideration for family relation. I photographed the agreement, along with emails between my mother and Mira discussing the investment opportunity that Victor has graciously extended. In one exchange Mira wrote, "This is completely confidential. Not all investors are receiving these terms. Victor is making an exception because you're my family. Elias doesn't need to know about this." The betrayal stung anew, but I pushed the feeling aside, focusing on my purpose. I sent the evidence to Catherine Reeves from my anonymous account, adding, investigation should focus on preferential terms for select investors and conflicts of interest in legal representation. I was careful to replace metadata on the photos and remove any identifying information before sending. Then I erased all evidence of my presence in my mother's home and left, the spring air carrying the scent of newly bloomed cherry trees as I walked to my car. That evening, as darkness settled over the city, I drove to the address written on Victor's business card. 7 p.m. Thursday, the meeting Mira had noted. The location was an upscale restaurant on the waterfront, its glass walls offering diners panoramic views of the Willamette River. I parked where I could observe the entrance without being seen. At precisely 7, Mira arrived in her silver Audi, wearing the emerald dress I'd given her for our last anniversary. Victor was already inside. I glimpsed him rising to greet her, his face lighting with the smile of a man who believes he's won something valuable. They weren't alone. 2 other men in expensive suits joined them, along with a woman I recognized from City Planning Commission photographs. This wasn't a romantic rendezvous, it was a business meeting. The final pieces being moved into place for the Riverside project. My phone buzzed with an email notification. Catherine Reeves, this is substantial. Working on story. Need 48 hours to verify. Any connection to upcoming vote at City Council? I hadn't known about a vote, but it made sense. The final approval for the development would need to come from the city. I researched quickly on my phone, finding the agenda for Monday's council meeting. The Riverside rezoning proposal was listed as the 3rd item. 3 days. The story would break just before the vote if Reeves worked quickly. As I watched Mira laugh and lean in to speak with the planning commissioner, my phone rang. My mother's name flashed on the screen. I declined the call, turning my attention back to the restaurant window. The game was in motion now. I couldn't stop it even if I wanted to. And I didn't want to. Friday morning, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing incessantly. Missed calls from my mother, from Mira, and 2 from numbers I didn't recognize. I ignored them all, focusing instead on my routine: shower, coffee, toast with the precise amount of butter I preferred. The Portland Tribune landed on my doorstep at 6:30 as it did every morning. No headline about Victor Hale yet. Catherine Reeves was still doing her due diligence. But soon. I drove to work through a light drizzle, the city returning to its natural state after yesterday's brief sunshine. The Willamette River churned gray and restless beneath the bridges I crossed, mirroring the anticipation I felt building inside me. At Westbrook Financial, I immersed myself in quarterly projections, letting the familiar rhythm of numbers and calculations soothe my mind. Around 10, my office phone rang, Myra's law firm on the caller ID. I let it go to voicemail. When I checked the message later, it was her assistant requesting a meeting regarding the dissolution of assets. I deleted it without responding. Just after lunch, Catherine Reeves emailed my anonymous account, Running Story Sunday edition. Sources confirm irregular permit approvals. Contacting Hale for comment today. Perfect timing. Victor would be scrambling all weekend, trying to contain the damage before Monday's council vote. I sent a brief acknowledgement and deleted the email account. Its purpose was fulfilled. As I was preparing to leave the office, my cell phone rang again. Mira. This time I answered. What do you want? I kept my voice neutral, giving nothing away. We need to talk. Her voice had a tightness I recognized, controlled panic. It's important, Elias. About the divorce? Your assistant already called. No, she paused and I heard her take a breath. It's about Victor. Someone's making allegations about the Riverside project. The Tribune is asking questions. I allowed myself a moment of silence, savoring her uncertainty. What does that have to do with me? Nothing, Another pause. Things might get complicated. Financially. For the divorce settlement. Of course. She was worried about her stake in the project, about the money she thought she'd be walking away with. I'm sure a talented attorney like yourself can handle it, I said evenly. After all, you're on track for partner. Her sharp intake of breath told me she caught my meaning. I knew about her partnership aspirations, about her stake in Riverside. What have you done? She whispered. Signed the divorce papers, I replied. Just as you wanted. Goodbye, Mira. I ended the call before she could respond and turned off my phone. The weekend stretched before me, 2 days to prepare for what would come next. Saturday morning, I drove to Forest Park, hiking the steep trails that wound through towering Douglas firs. The air was dense with the scent of wet earth and pine, cleansing my lungs with each breath. I walked for hours, remembering how Mira had always complained about these hikes. The mud, the exertion, the lack of cell service. She had accompanied me in the early years of our marriage, gradually finding excuses until she stopped coming altogether. A memory surfaced, our third anniversary, a picnic on this very trail. Mira laughing as she poured champagne into plastic cups, her hair catching sunlight through the trees. To us, she had toasted. The sensible, boring couple no one would suspect of anything scandalous. Had she been sincere then? Or had she already been measuring me, finding me wanting? By the time I returned home, exhausted and mud-spattered, my voicemail was full again. My mother, increasingly frantic. Call me immediately, Elias. Victor Hale is making accusations. He thinks someone close to the project is feeding information to the press. Mira, her voice trembling with anger, I know you're behind this. Whatever you think you're doing, you need to stop. You have no idea what you're interfering with. And one from a number I didn't recognize, Victor himself. Mr. Carver. I believe we should meet to discuss matters of mutual concern. Your wife, excuse me, soon-to-be ex-wife, seems to think you might be harboring resentments that are manifesting in unfortunate ways. I assure you that would be unwise. The threat was thinly veiled, his voice carrying the confidence of a man accustomed to intimidating others into submission. I saved the message as evidence and spent the evening reviewing the financial models I'd created, identifying additional weaknesses in Victor's business structure that would become relevant once the Tribune story broke. Sunday dawned misty and cool. I walked to the corner cafe to buy the Tribune, feeling a calm certainty as I unfolded the paper. There it was, front page of the business section. Questions surround fast-tracked Riverside development. Catherine Reeves had done thorough work, outlining the unusual speed of permit approvals, the discrepancies in reported costs, and the preferential treatment certain investors had received. No names were mentioned beyond Victor's and the public officials involved, but it was enough. Seeds of doubt had been planted. The morning was still young when my doorbell rang. Mira stood on my porch, rain darkening her hair, her face pale with fury. You've ruined everything, she said, pushing past me into the house. Are you satisfied now? I closed the door calmly, turning to face the woman I had once loved beyond reason. She looked different somehow, harder, her beauty sharpened by anger until it seemed almost brittle. I haven't done anything but sign the papers, I replied. As you said, I'm not man enough to fight for you. Her eyes narrowed. Don't play innocent. The Tribune article, those allegations, they could only have come from someone with inside knowledge of the project. Like an investor? I suggested. Or legal counsel? Her face paled further. You think this is a game? Victor is furious. He's already talking to the other partners about removing me from the legal team. Do you understand what that means for my career? For the first time since she'd handed me divorce papers, I smiled. Yes, I said simply. I believe I do. Mira left my house in a fury, tires screeching as she pulled away from the curb. I watched her go with a strange detachment, as if observing someone I barely knew. In many ways that was true. The woman I'd married had either been a carefully crafted illusion or had transformed into someone unrecognizable. I spent Sunday evening preparing for the week ahead. The Tribune article would force Victor to react, and I needed to anticipate his moves. If I had calculated correctly, he would be desperate to salvage the city council vote scheduled for the next day. Monday morning arrived with a torrential downpour that turned Portland streets into rushing streams. I dressed with particular care, my best suit, a crisp white shirt, the blue tie I'd worn the night I followed Mira to the Pearl. I wanted to look my best for what would come. At Westbrook Financial, an unexpected visitor was waiting in the lobby, Victor Hale himself, immaculate in a tailored gray suit despite the weather. His smile didn't reach his eyes as he extended his hand. Mr. Carver. I believe it's time we met properly. I shook his hand briefly, noting the firm grip, a power move from a man accustomed to dominating every interaction. Mr. Hale. This is a surprise. I think we both know it shouldn't be. His voice was quiet, meant only for my ears despite the receptionist watching curiously from her desk. Perhaps we could speak somewhere private? I led him to a small conference room, deliberately choosing one with glass walls. I wanted witnesses to this encounter. We sat across from each other, two predators assessing strengths and weaknesses. I'll be direct, Victor said, leaning forward slightly. The Tribune article yesterday contained information that could only have come from someone intimate with the Riverside project. I read it, I replied neutrally. Concerning allegations. Very. His smile tightened. Particularly given the timing, just before today's council vote. Some might call that suspicious. Or fortunate. For taxpayers. His eyes, cold blue, calculating, narrowed slightly. Mira seems to think you might be harboring resentment about your personal situation. My divorce, you mean? It was Myra's decision. I simply signed the papers. Yes, she mentioned that. Very accommodating of you. His tone suggested this was a weakness rather than a virtue. But sometimes the quietest men hide the deepest grudges. I met his gaze steadily. Is there a point to this conversation, Mr. Hale? He leaned back, studying me. I came to offer you a proposition. The Riverside project is going to proceed regardless of today's temporary setback. When it does, it will generate significant returns for all involved. And I'm offering you an opportunity to participate. A 5% stake, the same as Myra's. Consider it compensation for any inconvenience our relationship may have caused you. A bribe wrapped in the thinnest veneer of business legitimacy. He was attempting to buy my silence, my complicity. That's an interesting offer, I said, keeping my expression neutral. But I'm curious. Why would you think I have any influence over what happens with the Tribune investigation or the council vote? Let's just say I recognize certain patterns, Victor replied smoothly. Information flows in particular ways. Someone with financial expertise and access to certain records might connect dots others wouldn't see. Sounds speculative. Perhaps. His smile returned, shark-like now. But speculation is my business, Mr. Carver. I've built an empire on calculated risks and reading people correctly. I reached into my pocket, feeling the reassuring weight of my father's watch. And how accurately do you think you're reading me right now? Something flickered across his face, uncertainty perhaps, before his mask of confidence returned. I think you're a man who understands value. Who recognizes opportunity. 5% of Riverside is worth nearly $7 million at completion. A generous offer for someone you've just met. I like to resolve complications efficiently. He stood, straightening his already perfect suit. Think about it. My number is on the card Mira kept in her coat pocket. The one you found last week. The casual mention of the business card was meant to unsettle me, to show he knew I'd been investigating him. I maintained my composure, rising to meet his eyes. I'll give it appropriate consideration. His handshake was firmer this time, his grip lingering a moment too long. One more thing, Mr. Carver. I don't respond well to pressure or threats. Neither does Mira. Whatever game you think you're playing, I suggest you consider the potential consequences very carefully. After he left, I returned to my office and closed the door. My hands were steady as I removed my phone and the small voice recorder I'd slipped into my pocket before meeting him. I played back the conversation, noting with satisfaction that his implied threats and bribe offer were captured clearly. I sent the recording to Catherine Reeves with a brief message. Victor Hale attempting to bribe potential whistleblower. Recorded this morning. Then I turned my attention to the markets, analyzing trends and patterns with the same methodical focus I was applying to dismantling Victor's world. By lunchtime, news alerts were appearing on my phone. The city council had postponed the Riverside vote pending further investigation. The first crack had appeared in Victor's foundation. Soon others would follow. My phone buzzed with a text from Mira. What did Victor say to you? He's not answering my calls. I didn't respond. Let her wonder, let her worry. The uncertainty would create distance between them, the first wedge in what would become a widening gulf. Outside my window, the rain had stopped, though dark clouds still hung low over the city. A brief respite, not a conclusion. The storm wasn't over, it was merely gathering strength. Tuesday arrived with Catherine Reeves's follow-up article. Riverside developer attempts to silence whistleblower. The piece included excerpts from my recorded conversation with Victor, though I remained unnamed, simply a financial professional familiar with the project. The recording itself had been posted to the Tribune's website, Victor's smooth voice promising millions in exchange for cooperation. The reaction was immediate. Local television news picked up the story, and by mid-morning Victor's name was trending on Portland's social media. I monitored it all from my office, outwardly focused on client portfolios while inwardly tracking the destruction of Victor Hale's carefully constructed public image. At 11 my mother called. I let it go to voicemail, but her message was revealing. Elias, what have you done? Victor is saying terrible things about you to everyone. He's telling investors you're behind some vendetta campaign. My investment, everything, is at risk. Her panic confirmed what I'd suspected. Victor was looking for someone to blame, and I was the obvious target. But suspicion wasn't proof, and I'd been careful to leave no direct evidence linking me to the Tribune articles. By noon, I decided to observe the fallout firsthand. There was a cafe across from Morris and Blackwell, Myra's law firm, that offered a perfect vantage point. I ordered coffee and a sandwich I had no intention of eating, choosing a window seat with a clear view of the building's entrance. I didn't have to wait long. At 12:30, Myra emerged, walking rapidly toward the parking garage. She looked harried, her usual composure fractured. Moments later, Victor's Audi pulled up to the curb. He didn't get out, but I could see Myra approach the passenger window. Their exchange appeared heated, Victor gesturing sharply while Myra shook her head repeatedly. After a few minutes, she stepped back, arms crossed defensively. Victor's car accelerated away, cutting off a delivery truck that honked in protest. Myra remained on the sidewalk, staring after him before slowly walking back toward her office building. I paid for my untouched lunch and returned to work, a sense of quiet satisfaction settling in my chest. The first fracture in their alliance had appeared, right on schedule. That evening, I stopped at a small neighborhood bar on my way home. The Driftwood, a place Myra had always considered beneath her standards with its scratched wooden tables and perpetually sticky floor. I ordered a whiskey neat and sat in a corner booth, watching raindrops race down the window beside me. Is this seat taken? I looked up to find Myra standing before me, still in her work clothes, a charcoal suit with a silk blouse the color of wine. Her makeup couldn't fully conceal the shadows beneath her eyes. "Help yourself," I replied, gesturing to the empty seat across from me. She slid into the booth, setting her designer handbag on the scarred table with visible reluctance. "I've been calling you. I've been busy." She signaled the bartender and ordered a gin and tonic before turning back to me. "You know why I'm here. I assume it has something to do with Victor's current public relations difficulties." Her eyes, the deep brown that had once seemed so warm, narrowed. "Don't play games, Elias. We both know you're behind this." "Do we?" The bartender brought her drink. She took a long sip before answering. "The Tribune articles, the leaked recording, the council vote being postponed. It's all too convenient." "For whom?" "For someone looking for revenge." I studied her face, the face I'd woken up beside for 8 years, the face I'd once believed I knew better than my own. "Revenge implies emotional investment. You made it clear I wasn't invested enough in our marriage. This isn't about our marriage." Her voice dropped to an urgent whisper. "Victor is dangerous when he's cornered. He's already convinced half the investors that you're orchestrating some sort of personal vendetta. My mother-in-law included." "Ex-mother-in-law," I corrected mildly. "And Judith is a grown woman who made her own investment choices." Myra leaned forward, her perfume, different now, something sharper than she'd worn during our marriage, drifting across the table. "You don't understand. Victor has connections. People who don't care about legal niceties. He's talking about hiring private investigators to look into your background, your finances. I have nothing to hide." "Everyone has something to hide, Elias." Her tone suggested intimate knowledge of this truth. "And Victor won't stop until he finds yours." I took a slow sip of whiskey, feeling the burn trace a path down my throat. "Is that why you're here? To warn me?" "I'm here because..." She stopped, conflict flickering across her face. "The firm is considering removing me from the Riverside account. Partners are worried about the appearance of conflict given our personal connection. Not concerned for my well-being then, but for her career prospects. Something's never changed." "That sounds like a professional problem, not a personal one." "It's both." Her fingers tightened around her glass. "Victor thinks I may have leaked information to you." "Did you?" "Of course not." The flash of anger seemed genuine. "But he doesn't trust me anymore. He's shutting me out of meetings, questioning my loyalty." I allowed myself a small smile. "Not man enough to fight for you, perhaps?" Her face flushed with anger or embarrassment, I couldn't tell which. "This isn't a joke, Elias. Everything I've worked for is falling apart." "Like our marriage did?" She had no answer for that. We sat in silence, the bar's ambient noise, clinking glasses, murmured conversations rain against windows, filling the space between us. Finally, she gathered her purse and stood. "Whatever you're doing, whatever you think you're accomplishing, it won't bring you peace. Believe me." I watched her walk away, her exit as dramatic as always, and finished my whiskey in a single swallow. My father's voice echoed in my memory, "Time reveals all, son. Just wait and watch." I checked my watch, his watch. The hour was growing late, but the night still held possibilities. Beyond the bar's fogged windows, Portland's streetlights blurred in the rain, halos of gold in the gathering darkness. Wednesday morning, I woke to multiple missed calls from my mother. Unlike previous days, I decided to return them. Whatever was happening with her investment in the Riverside project, I needed to know. She answered on the first ring. Finally, she said, her voice brittle with tension. I've been trying to reach you for days. I've been busy, mother. Too busy to return calls while my entire retirement is imploding? The accusation was sharp, but beneath it, I heard something unfamiliar in Judith Carver's voice: fear. What's happened? A deep breath, then, Victor called an emergency investors meeting last night. He claims there's a coordinated attack against the project. Leaks to the press, manipulated financial data, the works. He named you specifically, Elias. Said you were using your position at Westbrook to access confidential information and undermine the development out of personal vindictiveness. Predictable. Victor was trying to rally his investors against a common enemy, me. And what did you say to that, mother? Pause. Nothing. I didn't know what to say. That was a first, Judith Carver rendered speechless. I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction before pressing on. Did he mention anything about investor funds? Another pause. He said they're temporarily frozen while they reorganize some aspects of the financing structure. Just a precaution, he assured everyone. Frozen funds. The first stage of what I suspected would become a complete financial collapse. I see. And Mira? Was she there? No. My mother's voice took on an odd quality. That's the other thing, Elias. Victor made some insinuations about her. Suggested she might have compromised her professional ethics due to your marriage. Said the firm was conducting an internal review of her handling of project documents. So Victor was turning on Mira publicly now, using her as a shield to deflect attention from his own misdeeds. I hadn't anticipated that particular move, but it worked in my favor. Mother, I need you to tell me something honestly. When did Victor first approach you about investing in Riverside? She hesitated. Last October. At the charity gala for the Children's Hospital. Mira introduced us. October, when Myra's late nights and changed behavior had begun. The timeline aligned perfectly. And what exactly did he promise you? 20% return guaranteed. Said it was a special rate for friends and family of the project team. Did that strike you as unusual? A guaranteed return that high? Of course it did, Elias. I'm not naive. The defensive edge returned to her voice. But Mira vouched for him. Said his track record was impeccable. And you trusted her judgment over mine. She's a corporate attorney. You're an analyst who's never taken a risk in his life. The words held a familiar sting. Besides, she showed me documentation, projected returns, market analyses, everything. It looked legitimate. I'm sure it did. I kept my voice neutral. One more question. Did Victor ever mention how he secured the permits for Riverside so quickly? A longer silence this time. He implied that he had relationships with certain members of the Planning Commission. That he understood how to navigate bureaucracy efficiently. Bribery, in other words. The final piece I needed. Mother, I want you to forward me any emails or documents you have from Victor or Mira regarding your investment. Everything. What? What are you going to do? Try to get your money back. After hanging up, I drove to the office, my mind working through the implications of what I'd learned. Victor was growing desperate, turning on allies, freezing funds. The foundations of his empire were beginning to crumble. At Westbrook, I received a surprising email from the HR director. Please come to my office at your earliest convenience. I found her waiting with the company's legal counsel, both wearing expressions of practiced neutrality. Mr. Carver, the lawyer began, we've received a concerning communication from Hale Properties alleging that you've misused your position here to access and distribute confidential financial information about their business. I had expected this. I assumed they provided evidence for this claim? They exchanged glances. Not specifically, no. But given the sensitivity. Then it's baseless, I interrupted calmly. I've never used Westbrook resources inappropriately. However, as a financial analyst, I have noticed concerning patterns in publicly available information about Hale Properties that might interest the SEC. The mention of the Securities and Exchange Commission changed the atmosphere in the room instantly. What kind of patterns? The lawyer asked cautiously. Potential securities fraud. Misrepresentation to investors. The usual red flags that precede a significant financial collapse. I kept my tone matter of fact. I'd be happy to prepare a report. By the time I left the meeting, I had shifted from defensive to offensive. Rather than suspending me as Victor had clearly hoped, Westbrook was now considering their own potential exposure if they failed to investigate his company properly. As I returned to my office, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk." Not on the phone. "Tonight, 8 p.m. Washington Park Rose Garden. Come alone. Judith." The number wasn't my mother's. I called her immediately. "Did you just text me about meeting in Washington Park?" "What? No." Her confusion seemed genuine. "I'm at home. Victor called an hour ago. He sounds erratic. Talking about recovering funds, investigating leaks. He mentioned you again. Mother, stay home. Lock your doors. Don't talk to anyone, especially not Victor or Mira." "Elias, you're frightening me." "Good. You should be frightened. I'll call you later." I ended the call, staring at the mysterious text. If not from my mother, then who? And why use her name? Outside my window, the afternoon sun broke through clouds, casting harsh light across Portland's skyline. The Rose Garden was public, well-lit, relatively safe. Whoever wanted to meet me there was offering neutral ground. I checked my watch. 4 hours until 8 o'clock. Time enough to prepare. The game had taken an unexpected turn, but I was still playing. I arrived at Washington Park Rose Garden 30 minutes early, parking my car several blocks away and approaching on foot. Years of analyzing risk had taught me to prepare for worst-case scenarios. The mysterious text using my mother's name suggested someone who knew about our relationship, likely Victor or Mira, but its purpose remained unclear. The garden was nearly empty in the evening chill, roses mere silhouettes against the darkening sky. March was too early for blooms, the plants dormant, waiting for warmer days. I chose a bench with clear sight lines in all directions and settled in to wait, my father's pocket watch a comforting weight in my hand. At precisely 8 o'clock, a figure emerged from the eastern path, a woman, her face obscured by the hood of her raincoat. Her familiar gait gave her away immediately. "Mira." She sat beside me, maintaining a careful distance. Up close, I could see the strain of recent days etched into her features, shadows beneath her eyes, tension in the set of her mouth. "You came," she said simply. "You used my mother's name. Effective." She nodded, scanning the garden nervously. "I couldn't risk Victor monitoring my communications. He's not himself." "And who is he really?" I asked, watching her reaction carefully. "The charming developer? The corrupt businessman? The manipulator?" She flinched at the last one. "You don't understand, Elias. Things have gotten complicated." "Explain it to me then." Mira pulled her coat tighter against the evening chill. "Victor's disappeared. That was unexpected." "What do you mean, disappeared?" "He called me last night, ranting about betrayal, about losing everything. Said someone had accessed his private accounts, that the SEC was asking questions." She looked at me directly. "Then this morning he wasn't at his penthouse. His assistant can't reach him. His car is gone." "Interesting. Victor was running, perhaps with investor funds. And you think I'd know something about this because? Because you've been 3 steps ahead since the beginning." There was a note of resignation in her voice, even admiration. "The Tribune articles, the recording, the timing of everything. You're behind it all, aren't you?" I didn't confirm or deny, merely watched a jogger pass by on a distant path. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Victor transferred $5 million from the project account before he vanished." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Including your mother's investment. And my stake." Now we reached the heart of it, not concern for me but for her money. Something's never changed. I thought the funds were frozen. That's what he told the investors. But he still had access. She ran a hand through her hair, a gesture of frustration I remembered from our marriage. "The firm is in damage control mode. They've removed me from all Hale Properties accounts, pending an ethics review. My partnership track is effectively dead." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, not entirely insincerely. I had wanted justice, not to destroy her career entirely. "No, you're not." She gave a bitter laugh. "And maybe I deserve it. But Victor, he's the one who should be facing consequences. Instead, he's vanished with millions while I take the fall. What do you want from me, Mira?" She hesitated, weighing her words. "I think I know where he might have gone. He has a waterfront property on the Columbia River, near Cascade Locks. It's not in his name, it's held by a shell company. Very few people know about it. And you're telling me this because? Because I want my money back." Her honesty was refreshing at least. "And because I owe you that much." I considered her words, searching for the trap, the manipulation. But all I saw was desperation, and perhaps a flicker of genuine remorse. "Give me the address," I said finally. She wrote it on a slip of paper, her handwriting as elegant as ever. As she passed it to me, our fingers brushed, the first contact since our divorce proceedings began. "Be careful," she warned. "Victor has a gun. And he's not rational right now." I pocketed the address. Why not go to the police? With what evidence? That a lawyer who's under ethics investigation suspects her former client of embezzlement? That would end any chance I have of salvaging my career. She stood, pulling her hood back up. "Besides, the legal system moves too slowly. That money will be in offshore accounts by the time they get a warrant." As she turned to leave, I called after her, "Why did you do it, Mira? Was it just the money?" She paused, silhouetted against the park lights. "At first it was ambition. Victor represented everything I wanted: success, power, excitement." A long silence. "You and we were steady, predictable. I convinced myself I deserved more. And now I understand what that more actually costs." She gave a small, sad smile. "Goodbye, Elias." I watched her walk away, her figure dissolving into the mist that had begun to settle over the garden. When she was gone, I examined the address she'd given me, tracing the letters with my thumb. Could be a trap. Victor and Mira could be working together still, luring me to an isolated location. But my instincts told me otherwise. The fracture between them was real, driven by self-preservation on both sides. I started walking back to my car, calling Catherine Reeves as I went. "I might have a lead on Victor Hale's whereabouts," I said when she answered. "And the missing investor funds." "I'm listening," she replied. By the time I reached my car, we had a plan. I would drive to the Columbia River property first thing in the morning, with Catherine following 30 minutes behind. If Victor was there, we would have our story, and evidence of his crimes. The hunt was on. Dawn broke over the Columbia River Gorge in layers of pink and gold, the water below a ribbon of quicksilver winding between steep cliffs. I'd been driving since 5 a.m., following the interstate east out of Portland until the city's glass towers gave way to the rugged beauty of Oregon's wilderness. The address Mira had provided led to a narrow private road that snaked up from the highway, almost invisible unless you knew what to look for. At its end stood a modern structure of glass and cedar, perched on the edge of a cliff with panoramic views of the river. A perfect hideaway for a man with secrets. Victor's black Audi was parked in the driveway, confirming Myra's information. I positioned my car behind a stand of Douglas firs, out of sight from the house, and texted Catherine my location. She was 20 minutes behind me, exactly as planned. While waiting, I checked the financial alerts I'd set up on Victor's accounts. There had been significant activity overnight, large transfers to accounts in the Cayman Islands, classic moves for someone planning to disappear. Among them, I noted with grim satisfaction, was a transfer of exactly $200,000, my mother's investment, to a separate account with routing numbers I recognized. Victor was organizing his escape fund. I was about to approach the house when a silver Audi pulled into the driveway. Mira. She hadn't mentioned she would be coming, and her presence complicated matters significantly. I watched as she exited her car, glancing around nervously before approaching the front door. Through binoculars, I observed their meeting through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Victor appeared haggard, his usual polished appearance replaced by rumpled clothes and uncombed hair. Their conversation appeared heated, Victor gesturing angrily while Mira maintained her composure, arms crossed defensively. I dialed Catherine. Change of plans. Myra's here too. Both our targets in one location, she replied. Perfect. I'm 10 minutes out. Wait for my signal before approaching. Something doesn't feel right. I ended the call and moved closer to the house, using the natural cover of trees and landscaping. Close enough now to hear raised voices through partially open windows. You think I don't know what you've been doing? Victor was shouting. Meeting with him at the park? Giving away my location? That's paranoid, Victor. Myra's voice was steady, reasonable, her courtroom tone. I came because you have my money. 5% of Riverside was my stake too. Your stake. He laughed bitterly. You've been working with your husband from the beginning, haven't you? Feeding him information, helping him destroy everything I've built. Ex-husband, she corrected automatically. And you're not thinking clearly. The Tribune articles, the SEC investigation, those aren't Elias's doing. You brought this on yourself with your shortcuts and bribes. I edged closer, positioning myself near a side door. Through the window, I could see Victor pacing, running his hands through his disheveled hair. It doesn't matter anymore, he said, his voice suddenly calmer. By tonight I'll be out of the country. New name, new identity. And my investment? Mira pressed. Consider it the price of your betrayal. He turned away from her, moving toward a laptop open on a sleek dining table. You should leave now. Forget you were ever here. I'm not leaving without what's mine, Mira insisted, following him. 2.5 million, Victor. I earned that. You earned nothing, he exploded, whirling to face her. You were a convenience, Mira. A useful tool. Access to legal shortcuts through your firm, a way to pressure your ex-husband into silence. Nothing more. The raw hurt that flashed across Myra's face was genuine. Whatever she had believed about their relationship, Victor was brutally dismantling it. That's not true, she said quietly. We had something real. We had transactions, he corrected coldly. And now our business is concluded. I saw his hand move toward his jacket pocket. Remembering Myra's warning about the gun, I made my decision. I entered through the side door, moving swiftly into the main room. That's enough, Victor. They both turned, shock registering on their faces. Myra's tinged with relief, Victor's with fury. Perfect timing, Victor sneered. The gang's all here for the final act. The money, Victor, I said calmly. All of it. The investors' funds, my mother's stake, Myra's percentage. It needs to be returned. His laugh was hollow. Or what? You'll write another anonymous tip to your journalist friend? Too late. In an hour, the money will be untraceable. Catherine Reeves is 10 minutes away, I informed him. With evidence of your embezzlement, bribery of city officials, and securities fraud. The FBI has been notified. This was a bluff. Catherine had contacts at the Bureau, but no official investigation had been launched yet. But Victor didn't know that. His hand completed its journey to his pocket, emerging with a small pistol that he pointed first at me, then at Mira. Nobody is calling anyone, he said, his voice deadly calm now. Both of you, phones on the table. Now. We complied, watching him carefully. Through the window behind Victor, I could see Catherine's car approaching on the private road. Time was running out. What's your plan here, Victor? I asked, keeping my voice measured. You can't shoot both of us and escape before the journalist arrives. His eyes darted between us, calculations running behind them. The gun wavered slightly in his hand. Victor, Mira said softly, taking a step toward him. This isn't you. Let's talk about this rationally. As she moved closer, his attention fixed on her, I saw my opportunity. I lunged, catching his gun arm and forcing it upward. The weapon discharged with a deafening crack, the bullet splintering the wooden ceiling beams. Mira screamed, a sound that seemed to hang in the air as Victor and I struggled for control of the gun. He was stronger than I had anticipated, desperation lending him power. We crashed into the dining table, sending the laptop crashing to the floor. Mira. I gasped. The laptop. She understood immediately, diving for the computer while Victor and I continued our struggle. The gun went off again, this time shattering one of the floor-to-ceiling windows, glass cascading down like deadly rain. And then Victor froze, his eyes fixed on something over my shoulder. I risked a glance back to see Catherine Reeves standing in the doorway, her phone held up, recording everything. Victor Hale, she said calmly. Care to comment on the missing Riverside investment funds? The weeks following Victor's arrest unfolded with a swift, almost mechanical precision. Catherine Reeves's footage of our confrontation, combined with the financial evidence recovered from Victor's laptop, provided authorities with an ironclad case. Securities fraud, embezzlement, bribery of public officials. The charges mounted as investigators unraveled the full extent of his operations. I observed it all with a detached interest, like watching the final moves of a chess match I'd set in motion but was no longer playing. My part was done. The justice I'd sought had arrived, not in a blaze of vengeance but in the cold, methodical workings of the system Victor had tried to corrupt. The investor funds were frozen, then recovered, most of them at least. My mother would get back 80% of her investment, the courts determined. She called to thank me, her voice carrying an unfamiliar note of humility. You were right, she admitted. About everything. I should have trusted your judgment. It wasn't about being right, Mother, I told her. It was about truth. We had lunch the following Sunday, our first real conversation in years. She spoke of my father with a softness I'd never heard before, recounting stories from their early years together. He was like you, she said. Quiet, watchful. I mistook that for weakness. I was wrong. The admission was as close to an apology as Judith Carver would ever come. I accepted it with a simple nod. Mira was placed on administrative leave from Morris and Blackwell pending an ethics investigation. The evidence suggested she hadn't known about the worst of Victor's crimes, but her involvement with him while representing his legal interests constituted a clear conflict. Her partnership dreams were over, at least at that firm. She texted me once, "Can we talk?" I considered it, weighing the potential value against the cost. Finally, I replied, "Nothing left to say." There wasn't. Whatever we had been to each other belonged to a past that no longer existed. Moving forward required leaving those ghosts behind. 1 month after Victor's arrest, on a rare clear spring morning, I drove to Riverview Cemetery, where my father had been buried 27 years earlier. I hadn't visited in some time, too many memories, too much unresolved emotion. But now it felt right, necessary even. His grave was simple, a modest headstone bearing his name, dates, and the words "beloved husband and father." I sat on the grass beside it, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. "You were right about time," I said aloud. "About watching and waiting." I pulled his pocket watch from my jacket, the silver case catching the sunlight. Some truths take longer to reveal themselves. A light breeze stirred the new leaves on the oak tree shading the cemetery, casting dappled shadows across the ground. In the distance, Portland's skyline shimmered, the city awakening to a day untainted by rain for the first time in weeks. As I sat there, I realized something had changed within me. The cold calculation that had driven my actions was receding, leaving space for something else. Not happiness exactly, but possibility. The weight I'd carried since finding the divorce papers was lifting, molecule by molecule, with each breath of spring air. My phone buzzed with a text from my realtor. "Offer accepted on the Lake Oswego property. Congratulations." The house I'd purchased was nothing like the one I'd shared with Mira. Smaller, older, with a view of the water and a dock for the kayak I'd always wanted but never bought. A place to begin again on my own terms. I wound my father's watch carefully, feeling the familiar resistance of the mechanism. 365 degrees, 1 full year of time contained in that simple action. I had always found comfort in its precision, its reliability. "I think I understand now," I continued, speaking to my father and perhaps to myself. It wasn't about fighting for someone who didn't want to be fought for. It was about standing up for what's right, regardless of the outcome. I placed my hand briefly on the sun-warmed stone of his grave. "I hope you would have been proud." Rising to my feet, I took one last look at the city below. The Riverside project was being restructured, I'd heard, taken over by a consortium of the original investors, minus Victor, with plans for affordable housing mixed with the luxury units. My mother had reinvested her recovered funds, this time after consulting me. Small steps toward redemption for everyone involved. As I walked back to my car, I passed a young couple with a small child, placing flowers on a nearby grave. The little boy looked up at me with solemn eyes, then suddenly smiled, an expression of such uncomplicated joy that I found myself smiling back. It had been a long time since I'd done that, smiled without calculation, without purpose. It felt foreign but not unwelcome. I drove away from the cemetery with the windows down, the scent of new growth filling the car. At a stoplight, I glanced at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The man looking back at me seemed different somehow, eyes clearer, expression more open. My phone rang, a colleague from work with a question about a new client. I answered, my voice steady and calm as I provided the information he needed. Life was continuing. Not the life I had planned, but perhaps the one I needed. I turned onto the highway, heading toward Lake Oswego and my new home. Ahead, the clouds were finally breaking, revealing patches of blue that had been hidden for months.